Welcome back, my fellow Warcraft grognards and TTRPG aficionados. Aficionados? I don't really know how that's supposed to be pronounced. I know that the folks watching my channel do like their TTRPGs. After all, the channel really started with a video about how I fixed quote-unquote World of Warcraft for a TTRPG, and the TTRPG videos have been getting consistently more views than others. But still, I got for you a TTRPG that is, no clickbait, genuinely forgotten by everyone. The only times I see it come up is when someone brings up, hey, did you know this existed? And there are good reasons for it, but it's really a shame that it suffered such a fate. And I'm here today to take a look at this genuinely forgotten pearl of the last century. Because yes, the year 2000 is last century. Crazy, I know. And the game I'm talking about is the StarCraft Alternity RPG. The first question the average YouTube viewer might be having is, what the hell is Alternity? And I don't blame you for not knowing this because I never played it either, and I mostly saw it come up as, yeah, that thing existed. Because as it turns out, even in the year 2000, back when the 3rd edition of D&D was king, even then D&D was completely monopolizing the market and everyone was forgetting other systems existed. Yet, much like today, a number of competitors, some more successful than others, have sprung up, and they were doing better when they tried to find their own niche, one that D&D couldn't easily fill. One such system was Call of Cthulhu, which focused on the eldritch horror of H.P. Lovecraft's brand, a system where you couldn't just solve most of your problems by hitting them hard enough. Another such attempted challenger for the crown was Alternity. Alternity differed from D&D in a couple of ways. It was published by TSR, the same people who were publishing D&D at the time, before WotC bought the company. At the time when Alternity was first published, in 1997, it was still the 2nd edition of AD&D. They dropped the A later. So originally, Alternity wasn't really a competition, as much as attempting to grab a different genre. Alternity was generally meant for more sci-fi themed games, where D&D style character classes would clash with the general themes. I mean, what class is Captain Kirk? Bard, probably, so maybe he's not the best example. Actually, he's also a monk. Also, a rogue, kind of. See my point? Sci-fi characters are not so easily organized into a couple of neat shelves. So Alternity tried doing something different. It does have a very similar system of 6 attributes, but then it organizes things into various skills. There are broad skills and specialty skills. The specialty skills fall under a wider category of broad skills. The example the StarCraft book gives you is unarmed attack as a broad skill and brawl as a specialty skill. So when you make a roll, you roll, for example for brawl, add your brawl modifiers, and unarmed attack has no modifiers but is assigned to the strength attribute, so you use its modifiers on top of that. And I don't really know if this is because of the time it came out in, because believe me, this is before even my time in the RPG scene, but it's got some weirdness to it. For example, when you make those skill checks, you want to roll low, not high. You want to roll below the threshold set by the DC. Initiative is also strange by our modern understanding. You don't just get ordered one by one in the order of your initiative roll. Everyone is divided into 4 phases: the amazing phase, the good phase, the ordinary phase, and the marginal phase. Imagine being told you're acting in the marginal phase, like you're marginally being useful. This is probably why the strictly numerical initiative order is better. Your division into those phases is based on your initiative roll. So, like, what, couldn't they just make you act in that order? I don't know. Also, unlike D&D, NPCs do not roll the initiative, but have their phase set in their stat block. For example, Zerglings act in the ordinary phase always and always after the ordinary phase PCs. Perhaps it does give the system a little more structure, but it also loses some element of player influence on what's happening. Damage is also done a little bit differently in that there is a stun hit points, wound hit points, and in the proper Alternity, mortal hit points. Stun HP really kind of explains itself. Losing it stuns you. but also losing a certain amount of stun hit points adds a wound. Losing a certain amount of wound hit points makes you lose a mortal hit point, and if you lose all your mortal hit points, you die. That's why it's called mortal hit points. Different enemy attacks target different hit points, and it's a neat system, but it is very different from what we're used to. The book also gives you a couple of sample adventures where you're working for Raynor and his alliance, and I haven't given a very thorough read to the adventures yet, but they do help set up the interbellum StarCraft world. This happens after Brood War. Kerrigan reigns supreme, and the remains of the Dominion and the Protoss are trying to survive in a hostile world. Raynor is still an outlaw, and with his raiders and his allied Protoss forces, he's trying to survive and maybe also undermine the great powers of the Cthulhu sector. And personally, I see a lot of potential in this setting. Underdogs are always fun to play, and being a part of this band gives you access to every character you'd want to play in StarCraft, be it a Rebel Terran, a conscripted grizzled Marine, a Protoss warrior, or a mutate. This book introduces the concept of mutates into the setting, a concept that sadly didn't really return in the setting proper. Mutates are essentially infested Terrans that have been partially de-infested and removed from the swarm's control. This is based on canon concepts because in the canon Secret Stukov missions from StarCraft 1, the resurrected infested Stukov gets de-infested as an experiment with Protoss nanites. He somehow gets reinfested before StarCraft 2 begins, and the details of that are not really explained. But at the time, the concept of these mutates running around was a tantalizing prospect, allowing us to play some form of Zerg that isn't a rabid beast. But here comes probably the weirdest part of this book. At least for me, one of the key elements of any RPG is creating your own character, taking all the building blocks the game gives you and putting them together into your own unique combination. This game does not really do that. At the end of the book, it gives you a bunch of hero folders that contain pre-built characters, and sure, you could replace the pictures and names because at the end these pre-built characters are basically the Marine, the Zealot, the Mutate. But still, you get no input over how these characters are built. The book gives you no explanation on how to create characters either, so you're kind of stuck with these. And yeah, you could probably figure out how they're built and like reverse engineer something different. Or if you played the main Alternity, you'd know the rules from there. But I didn't, and probably a lot of people picking this up didn't either, because they just wanted StarCraft. And this book knows it. On the cover, it proudly proclaims tabletop RPG, no computer required, and goes into a lot of detail about very basic TTRPG concepts, because once again, this was 2000. TTRPGs were not half as popular as they are today, and the publisher wanted the StarCraft players to pick this up, and probably determined that giving them pre-made stat blocks of their favorite units to play was enough. StarCraft Alternity is hardly the only RPG that does that. Talislanta is the other one that comes to mind first, but I really feel like you miss something huge when you don't get to create your own character. Like, what if I want to create a Firebat? And there is no Firebat in this book. I know there was this other booklet that had a bunch of other stuff, like it had like stats for a Goliath mech or a Firebat. But in this actual book that they wanted people to pick up, there is no Firebat. How do you make a StarCraft book with no Firebat? I mean, you know? Like, what if I wanted to create a Herc? I know they weren't invented yet at the time, but what if I wanted to create something that plays in a similar way, using building blocks that existed in the setting? Some of those weird elements of this RPG might have been reasons why it was so forgotten. However, the biggest reason was outside of the system itself. As I mentioned, this book was published in the year 2000. You know what else happened in 2000? TSR was officially discontinued and all of its activities were incorporated into Wizards of the Coast, who decided not to continue Alternity. And StarCraft Alternity died with its mother system immediately. It has been 25 years since then, and many systems have faced various revivals. Alternity hasn't, although some core elements of it have inspired later systems such as D20 Modern, which also isn't being continued by now as far as I know. So Alternity and StarCraft Alternity are dead in the water. I can see the mother system of this adaptation being potentially revived to some degree, if there was some corporate will in it, or maybe if a dedicated fan group started working on it, updating some of the systems to the more modern sensibilities, like making higher rolls good, or giving us proper character creation systems. However, so far, nothing like that has been happening. Do you want to see that happening? Let me know in the comments below. But I'm afraid that's it when it comes to our look at this genuinely forgotten, very short-lived classic TTRPG. StarCraft is still dear to my heart, being one of the very first video games I played, and it still pains me to see how abandoned it is in every genre. It is what it is, and that's it for now. If you want to see more on this topic, perhaps some attempt at a revival, let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.